kind of talk to us, and you can also talk up to the camera. We're still working on that part of like being good. Basically, that's your audience.
Hey.
Hey. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Empty out our pockets.
Yeah.
It's just uncomfortable to sit with a bunch of shit.
There's that Gene.
Pretty neat little studio.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. They've actually been doing like, you know how the quarantine setup now is like Zoom, everybody's doing that. He's like, I've been doing that for over 3 years now, like putting all this together. So he had a lot of the big news studios in the city asking him how to set that stuff
Figured out
up.
how to do it.
Yeah, because he said all of them were like doing Zoom via like TVs and stuff like that. And he said their audio quality was awful.
Right.
So they just couldn't, they didn't know what they were doing.
People in here, they're gonna see us 3 people sitting close together with no masks on.
Get started. Yep. Alright. 2, 3. Perfect. All right. Got volume down. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Podcast, and we're on episode number 2 of the husband and wife team rock and roll this together, which is super duper fun. So welcome.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. As always, our show is sponsored by our practice, Wild and Precious Optimal Living. So we are a husband and wife team, a neurologically based chiropractic office located in the beautiful Wheat Ridge, Colorado. So for all you parents out there, listen up. If you have a kid that is struggling with neurosensory issues, maybe something like ADHD, sensory processing, or even autism, then I invite you to, 1, check out our website, and 2, really see what we're up to, because we specialize in helping those kind of kids through non-pharmaceutical approaches to, 1, address the underlying neurological function that maybe has never been addressed, but 2, really help your kids start to achieve and gain that quality of life that maybe they've been missing their entire life. So if you're out there, if you're a parent that's struggling, if you're looking for answers or solutions, then I invite you to give us a call, check us out, and let's see if we can help change the trajectory of your health and your kid. So today we have a very special guest in studio. I'm super excited about this one.
I am excited too. We're always following Dr. Ryan Marchman, who's not only a human chiropractor, but also an animal chiropractor as well too. And so we're excited to be able to have him on board.
Absolutely. So today our special guest has Dr. Lynn let the cat out of the
Oh,
bag.
man.
First animal pun today.
I got excited. Oh,
We got all
sorry.
of these coming in. Don't worry, folks, there's a lot more. So we got Dr. Ryan Marchman on the show. He is not only, like I said, a human chiropractor, but an animal one. So we're going to be talking about our 4-legged and some 2-legged friends.
Right, lots of friends.
Lots of friends today. So Dr. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk. Yeah.
So, animal chiropractic. Tell us, I guess first of all, tell us your background story. How did you get into being a chiropractor, and then what led you to decide to want to work with animals?
Yeah, that's a long story. My journey into chiropractic, it's, you know, a lot of people have had some kind of healing experience where they went to a chiropractor and they got better, and so they decided to become one, or they saw somebody close to them that happened to, and that didn't really happen for me. My journey through health and healing started when I was really young. I was 5 years old. I nearly died. I had a near-death experience. I came down with a mysterious illness, and I was rushed to the hospital. I spent.
Happy. Lean forward just a little bit to the mic there.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah. I spent 5 days and 7 days in the pediatric ICU in Gainesville, Georgia, and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me, but my vitals were tanking. I was failing, and they told my parents that I was going to die, and they didn't know why or how to fix it. And then after a week, I remember waking up the first morning when I was no longer in the ICU. I was in a regular hospital room. I had had miraculously begun to recover overnight, and nobody knew why, just like nobody knew why I was sick in the first place. And I remember I got out of the little hospital bed. That was before you were hooked up to all the machines and stuff, and I don't know where my parents were, but they weren't in the room. And I grabbed my little IV card and I carted it out into the hallway, and I walked down to the end of the hallway, and there was a big plate glass window at the end of the hallway. And I looked out of the window, and it's Gainesville, Georgia. So Gainesville, Georgia is very green, not like here in Colorado. And so there was green grass, there was a tree, there was a fence that was covered in kudzu, which back east kudzu is it's kind of ivy that grows all over the place. Looks like a jungle. And I just looked outside and I saw all this green stuff, all this life out there, and I realized in that moment that I was alive, because when you're 5 years old, you don't really realize that you're alive. You know, you're jumping around doing things and playing, but the thought never really occurred to me before that I was actually a living thing, and that I was pretty close to not have been being a living thing, and that the life outside the window that I saw and all the green stuff, the trees and the kudzu, was the same as what's in me. And that was a realization I had when I was 5, and I had no way of contextualizing that experience. So, long story short, I survived. I went back home, and I was a precocious reader. I could read at 5. And my father had always told me that if I don't understand something, to look it up in the dictionary. So I picked up his encyclopedic dictionary, and I tried to learn about life. And of course, you can't learn about life from a dictionary. But I moved from the Encyclopedia Dictionary. When I was 6, we got a first computer, and I had an Encyclopedia Britannica on the computer. And then my life went along this way for about 20 years, studying health and healing, what causes people to get sick, what causes people to get well, anything human, animal, biologic, what makes people tick, what drives people, psychology, and I studied a wide range of subjects, super far left brain subjects like biochemistry and physics, and super right brain subjects like spirituality and human potential, and my career developed around kind of my central focus of trying to contextualize that experience, that near-life experience that I had when I was 5 years old. And I opened my first professional healing practice as a neuromuscular therapist when I was 20 years old. I was seeing people before that, not legally. I lost my first patient who died when I was 18 years old. I was a neuromuscular therapist for 5 years. I was a nutritional consultant for 6 years. I taught anatomy and physiology for 3 years. And my life just kind of went on this way, and I went from one therapy to the next, learning more and helping people in certain ways. However, I always felt that I hadn't gotten the answer yet.
Can I interject real quick and ask,
Absolutely.
in your studies and looking at these far left brain subjects, the biochemistry and physics,
Yes.
and then working to the right brain subjects into spirituality and life potential and everything, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned? Like, what still sticks with you today in your applications?
Yeah, I think that'll become more clear when I get to the end part of the story. Yeah,
cool.
Because I was helping people a lot, and however, I still didn't feel like I'd gotten kind of the answer that I was searching for, and then I decided to become a chiropractor. At a 15-year career in martial arts, and my old martial arts master was a bone setter from Hong Kong, and when I was a teenager he told me go to chiropractic school and learn how to set bones. And so I thought, well, why not try that since I wasn't there yet. And halfway through chiropractic school I was listening to a guy on stage, Dr. Arnaud Bernier, and he told a story of the first time he went to a chiropractor. He'd gotten into a motorcycle accident and hurt his back really badly. He heard that chiropractic was good for when you hurt your back, so he went to this chiropractor named Jean Belival in Paris. And Jean Belival, he sat there while Arnaud explained his symptoms and his pain and what happened and everything, and Jean just kind of looked at him and he said, "Arnaud, there's nothing that I can do about what's wrong with you. I can only address what is right in you. You can't fight darkness, you can only turn on light. You can't fight sickness, symptom, and disease. You can only turn on life." And when I heard that, it clicked. All the stuff that I'd learned for the past 20 years, Arnaud finally contextualized it for me in such a way that I understood that all the therapies that I was doing and all the subjects that I learned and all the places I was looking, I was trying to make people feel better, but I wasn't really trying to make them heal better.
Yeah.
And I was trying to fight their sickness, their symptoms, and their disease using all these different approaches that I learned, when I should have been focused on helping to increase the expression of life, regardless of the presence of sickness or symptom or disease. And that's, in that moment, that's when I understood that vitalistic chiropractic, this particular form of chiropractic that I practice, was the answer that I was looking for. And it brought everything that I learned together, and I never looked back. So some of the stuff that stuck with me, like you asked about, I learned a lot about the energy systems of the body, systems from the Far East. I learned a lot about the chemical systems of the body, systems from the West, and I think that they're all. The thing that I learned, I think, that really stuck with me the most is that none of them is a complete model, and none of them are the truth. They help us get our mind. They're like a map. The map is not the actual territory, right? You can draw a map of a mountain, but that map is not the mountain. And I think all of these systems that we've come up with over the centuries of science and metaphysics and everything, they all give us a piece of the puzzle, but they're not the actual, they're not actually life. It's just us trying to map life.
So before we go further, because I know that you're,
Sure.
you bring up some really, part of it is a lot about the what's working right in the body, what's working, what's already, and so can you give for our audience who's never been really familiar with what chiropractic is, and stereotypically with chiropractors they think low back pain,
Sure.
I'm not going to see a chiropractor until I feel symptoms, and it's always mostly joint or musculoskeletal related. The other ones as well too is really looking at what is vitalistic chiropractic. Can you discern what is the difference between what stereotypical chiropractic is, and then perhaps what is this path of vitalistic chiropractic? Yeah,
that's great. So like Arno, when he went to Jean Belival because he hurt his back, most people find chiropractic because they've hurt themselves. They have a backache, they have a neck ache, they have a headache, or something along those lines, and they heard somewhere along the line that a chiropractor might help them. Even something like menstrual cramps or asthma or like you were talking about ADHD, autism. A lot of people hear about various conditions that chiropractic can help, right? And so they seek out a chiropractor because what they come from is the Western medical model that says, I'm not sick if I don't have a symptom, and when I do have a symptom, that's when I seek treatment for that symptom. So they wait until they have symptoms to come into our office and seek what they think of as a treatment. When they get into our office, what they learn is that the chiropractor isn't treating anything and doesn't cure their disease. What chiropractors really do is increase the efficiency of the body's own natural healing processes. So you can think of a chiropractor as an efficiency expert. If there are distortions in what I call the neurospinal system, the axis between the brain, the spinal cord, and the structures that surround the spinal cord, what most people call the spine. If there are distortions in the neurospinal system, the body has to adapt to those distortions. So it requires energy to maintain a distortion. That energy then is not available for use by vital systems of the body, right? Just like a race car, if it's out of alignment, it's not going to run as efficiently as it could before, and it's going to wear the tires, it's going to waste gas, and so on, and it's going to break down. Well, the body is the same way. With the distortions in the neurospinal system sapping away the body's vital energy, the body breaks down. So when you come into a chiropractor's office and the chiropractor says, okay, you have this symptom, I hear you, but what I want to do is check your spine. What they're saying is that I'm going to tune your body to maximum efficiency so that the distortion is no longer sapping away energy, and the body can then reorganize around whatever disorder it is that you think you've got, right? And hopefully bring you back into balance that way. And that's the difference between what you might call a mechanistic chiropractor and a vitalistic chiropractor, because I made that distinction earlier. Mechanism or materialism, sometimes it's called reductionism, is the dominant paradigm of science that has existed since Isaac Newton. It's shifting now since the 30s because of quantum physics, but in the Newtonian paradigm, what you say is that everything in the universe is just a collection of pieces and parts, and all the phenomena in the universe are interactions of pieces and parts. You know, everything is matter or energy, and there's nothing else. So the human body is a collection of joints and bones and muscles and chemicals, all interacting according to their own natures, and that's all you are. A vitalist, in addition to the pieces and parts, says, hold the phone, there's something else here. In addition to the inert matter that makes up our body, there is a vital force that exists on its own, independent of the Newtonian materialist model. It adds the existence of a vital force, or life itself, and that life is not just a product of chemistry. Life has its own own existence, right? And that's the difference between a vitalist and a mechanist. So a vitalistic chiropractic is, rather than being a mechanic and trying to fix the pieces and parts, I want to acknowledge that those sometimes need to be fixed. But what I really want to focus on is the expression of life through the body. You know? And if the pieces and parts are draining away the life force, or so you could call it that, then of course you want to realign them. But really what we're focused on is improving life.
If I can add something to that as well, because we're good friends outside of talking on radio shows. So we have a lot of these kind of discussions, especially about the philosophy of health and healing. And one thing I really want to add a contextual, some context to, is this mechanism and this vitalistic discussion. Because, you know, in the world of allopathy, you know, which is the predominant Western medicine belief system and the predominant, you know, health belief systems of most people, is that, you know, there is life in the body, yes, but I think an important word to add in is intelligent life.
Yeah.
Right? There's intelligent life happening, and that's a big piece of what we as vitalistic chiropractors acknowledge, is that, you know, one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Bill Bain was, you know, we're working with life, and life knows what to do. And like you're talking about, it's these efficiencies that, or you know, lack of efficiency that chips away at this expression of intelligent life that then ultimately leads to these symptoms and sickness and disease.
Right.
And what we're doing is clearing out those inefficiencies to create greater efficiency, to create greater function, which ultimately results in greater quality of life. So that's
right.
Yeah, this focus on this intelligence, though, that's here, that I think it's really sad that it lacks in our healthcare system, where it's like, hey, you're just this big this big bag of bones and muscles and tissue, and there's not really any intelligence in it, which is why you have a dysfunctional gallbladder, which has to be cut out, or you have this dysfunctional, you have a bad back, sorry, you just got dealt a bad hand of cards, and you have to live with it. Or we can put rods in your spine and you can walk yourself out of here.
Right. Yeah, like what you said, life knows what to do.
Yeah.
There's a saying in chiropractic that life doesn't need any help. What it needs is no interference.
Right.
So I tell the story to my patients sometimes, like, if you plant an acorn in the ground, you're going to get an oak tree, and you don't have to help it. You know, but if the sprout comes up out of the ground and you put a rock on top of it, that sprout is going to have a hard time expressing itself as an oak tree. It'll probably die. You don't have to do anything to the tree. All you have to do is remove the rock, and life knows what to do. The tree will express itself and grow into an oak tree. However, not you or me or any doctor in the entire world can fix the tree. You know, life has to do the repairing. We can only remove the rock, and that's the same thing chiropractors do, is that we remove what's called a subluxation, which is our fancy word for those interferences. We remove the interference to the expression of life, so that people, and in my case, animals, can express life to their fullest.
So then let's dive into that now. So you started your practice, you were working, okay, so have we gotten to the part of the story where you've graduated? So you graduated school,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, I became a chiropractor, looking back and all that.
Right. So then now you're in practice, and what has shifted your focus now towards animals? Because most people probably have never even heard of an animal chiropractor.
Yeah, there aren't very many of us around.
No.
And there are fewer of us who do what we do kind of in the public eye, because a lot of people think it's a little strange.
Absolutely.
But I started my practice, I had a focus on moms and kids,
Yeah.
like a lot of chiropractors do. And it never really took off for me, you know, and I realize it's because of my personality. I'm not too much of a family-oriented person, and so it makes sense that I wouldn't attract families in that way. However, I've always been an animal person. I grew up on a farm in Georgia. I probably owned 30 dogs in my lifetime. We always had 5 or 6 dogs running around.
Yeah.
And you know, I love horses. I love animals. We had all kinds. And I happened to meet when after I opened my practice, I happened to meet an old timer named Jay Komarick, who's a chiropractor, and he came to work in my office for a while. And Jay, he kind of put animal chiropractic on the map. He's been adjusting horses now. Well, he doesn't do it now anymore, but I think 43 years, 44 years or something like that. And we became close friends, and I started to apprentice with him. And I apprenticed with him for 2 years. And I went out with him to horse call after horse call, and I watched him work with these horses, and I learned his techniques. And eventually he retired, and I took over not only the people that he was adjusting, but his dogs and horses and other animals. And so my practice really flourished when I embraced the part of me that is an animal lover, and I stopped trying to be the pediatric chiropractor like I was told I ought to be, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's a good lesson in expressing your own truth rather than trying to fit into a box. But that's what happened for me, and since then, animals have really become a large part of my practice. About half my practice now is horses, and people are about 40%, and the rest is small animals, dogs and cats and things like that.
So with that in mind, it sounds like, you know, it's how fortuitous that, you know, Jay ended up, you know, being in the same space as you were practicing. Sure. And you had these opportunities to apprentice. It sounds like, I mean, I know Jay in our chiropractic circle, and I've always really, even in chiropractic school, like, you know, next to Arnaud Bernier, it was just one of those where it's just, there's this mystery behind how it wasn't about the science. It's like, oh, where you move the P to A on this bone or whatever aspect, right? It's there's this connection that, you know, I've never seen Jay adjust an animal live, but even the pictures or even the stories he shares on social media and you share now, I see that similarity. Yeah. There's something that there is obviously this connection. What is one big takeaway when you were apprenticing, and now that Jay's kind of moved forward in his own retirement, and you know, two or few of your experiences, lessons learned that really help to fuel what you're doing now?
Yeah, besides the technique, which is of course crucial to what I do, the biggest thing I learned from Jay is the concept of, I'm not here to do anything to this animal. I'm here to do something with the animal. Right? Whereas a lot of people, when they approach an animal, or in pediatric practice, if you approach a child or baby, it's like you want that entity to fit into your little box so that you can do what you want to do to it, so that they can then send it out of your office, right? And you can't do that. You can't do that with the kids. You can't do that with an animal. Whenever I'm working with a horse, if I try to do something to the horse says no. You can't make a horse do anything you don't want to do unless you hurt it. And of course, I'm not there to try and hurt somebody's animal. So what I really had to learn was how to do a chiropractic adjustment, something that you can't explain to a horse. A horse can't rationally understand what you're trying to do to it. And it can't understand my instructions. There's no language. You know, horses don't speak English. So how do we do this complex maneuver with an animal who can't understand me? And that's kind of really what Jay taught me, is how do I communicate with the animal in such a way that it assists me in the adjustment?
And an animal that's much, much bigger than you.
Yeah, very big. Yeah, you know, a horse is not going to let you do anything it doesn't want you to do.
No.
It could run me over if it really wanted to. You know, so how do you gain the participation of the horse? How do you follow the natural rhythms of the horse's body, or the dog's? And then how do you deliver the adjustment in such a way that it's not an insult to the animal's system? That the animal understands that the intention is helpful and not harmful. Because if the animal thinks that you're trying to harm it, it's going to leave. Right. You know, it's going to run away or kick me or whatever. And that's the concept of doing it with the animal, not doing it to the animal. A lot of times you can tell when horses have had something done to them, because as soon as you approach them, they get spooky, they get twitchy, that you try to touch them and they move away. And you know, so I have to go slow, I have to speak the animal's language, I have to show them my body language and my energy so that they understand I'm a friend, and although what I'm doing to them may be unfamiliar, that it's not harmful.
Yeah, and with that in mind, you know, obviously, because we're all health practitioners here, and I feel like one thing I took away when I studied with Arnaud is just, it's your own being, your own presence, and it's not just with animals, but also with humans too.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's a constant practice, and I don't think people, maybe other health practitioners who's listening to this may understand that whether you're a massage therapist or you're, you know, a medical doctor or a Reiki practitioner, you know, if you're working to serve someone, there's an energy that you're dancing with, and I think there's a constant practice behind that too. So how does that translate too with your dynamic? And you know, there is that consciousness. I know that Dr. Sam, he works a lot with kiddos, and sometimes kiddos are crying, and it's hard to be able to, you know, taking that mode. Maybe we can learn something from you, and this is just with that, it's like we're not doing something to the kiddo, we're not doing something to a crying child, but we're doing something with them. So how can we take that presence in that sense, or that willingness, the openness, the, you know, even the nonverbal cues, like what does that look like for, in practice for a human?
How do you learn how to do that? That's a good question. I think if you get kicked by a horse a few times, you start to learn.
You're still walking, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, fortunately, I don't get bitten or kicked very often. So, and I think that's a big benefit of having trained with somebody like Jay or Arnaud, is that their focus is not on the mechanics. The technique is really crucial, and you have to learn it. But the technique is just the delivery system. The technique is not what you're delivering. What you're delivering is the awakening of consciousness that occurs whenever you, when you give the brain back its energy, it can't help but become better. Right. And so you approach the person or the animal with this consciousness of, you know, I don't know you and you don't know me, and you might not trust me right now. However, deep inside me, I know that what I'm going to do is going to help you be better, and that's my intention for you. And you can't have any doubt about it. You know, doubt is poison in your practice. You know, you can't have any doubt about it, and you have to understand that wherever they are in their life, however they perceive you or however they perceive the techniques that you're doing or whatever it is, all that is their stuff and not yours. You have a gift that you're there to give them, and that's it. You've got no agenda on how they accept it or don't, how it changes their life or doesn't, whether they believe you or not. You're just there to give it away. You do it in exchange, of course, but you give them this gift of increased consciousness. You know, they're going to be in better touch with the natural intelligence of their body, and if you hold that in your mind, it becomes a lot easier. If you approach the person with the thought of, oh man, I hope this person gets it, well, you've already thrown it out the window, right? Because now you have an agenda for them. Or, you know, I hope this person signs up for a program, or, you know, I really hope they get better. Like, all those are fine intentions, but they really ruin your work. You have to approach them with the only intention you can have is the intention to deliver that gift that you've been given to give to them.
I love that message. We're going to pause for just a second for some station identification. So this is KUHS, The Stream, Denver, and you are listening to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show, sponsored by our practice, Wild and Precious Optimal Living. So we are live today with Dr. Ryan Marchman, animal chiropractor, and we're deep into a discussion right now of consciousness, of what I would think it could be classified as nonverbal communication. As you know, one of the biggest things I think we're hearing, the underlying message is that message of doing something with somebody, not to somebody, or doing something with an animal, not to an animal. And certainly resonates powerfully with me, because like we talked about, you know, we work with a lot of kids in the practice, and yeah, I mean the same thing with, you know, a 1-year-old or even up to a 2-year-old. You can't really explain to them what you're doing. There's no rational mind there like, hey, lay down, we're going to do this, and this is going to happen, and this is the result that we want. They don't understand that. Their brain's not developed enough to do it. So that, yes, that intention piece of your energy, how you're approaching them, all that is critical. So I'm really curious, Now, working with animals, what has been some of the most, I guess, challenging aspects of it? And how have you overcome that, especially now with, not having somebody there every single day, like, well, hey, what do I do about this? Or what do you think about this?
Yeah. One of the most challenging things, it kind of goes along with what we just talked about, is self-management. Because if I go in and I'm not clean, if I have something on my mind, or I'm having a bad day, well, then the animal's having a bad day too. And then and that's when things get actually more dangerous for me and for the animal. And so it's really difficult some days to separate whatever's going on in my personal life from the clarity of focus that I need to really do a good job with something like a horse, which can be dangerous. You can kind of get away with it with people, because people on the table, they're not really paying attention to you either. They've got their own stuff in their mind. But a horse is 100% presence. They don't have a prefrontal cortex. Their prefrontal cortex is about that thin. So they're not projecting into the future, or they're not thinking about the past. Their eyes are on you, and they're wondering what you're doing there in front of them, and what you're doing it every time you touch them. Right. And you have to be as present with the horse as the horse is with you. And I imagine it's the same thing with a child.
Absolutely.
And so that's the most challenging part is I'm really good at presence. That's one of the things that I think one of my strong suits. However, it can be challenging some days, especially if I have something else going on, to stay in that. Whenever like a country music song, your truck broke down and your dog ran away.
That's a classic. That's a triple black.
Yeah, right. On that day, can you still show up for people and do a good job?
Right. So do you have there's a couple questions that I want to be able to ask, and this circles back to, first of all, and maybe you can answer both questions. First of all, is just, obviously when you're adjusting an animal, right away their optimal expression of life, you're helping them connect to that optimal expression of life, and immediately it's more easily expressed, or you see that more with an animal, because you just described that they don't have a prefrontal cortex, or that it's very, very, very small, the region of it. So compared to us, so then they're very present animals, whether it's dogs, cats, roosters, right? Horses. So with that said, what does that show up? What does that look like when? Because for our listeners, it's just like, well, what is that? How do you know that they've reached that expression, right?
That's great.
And then it leads to another question too, and maybe this will tie in together too. Is, what is your routine behind being present with the animal? Like, do you have like a thought process behind it?
Yeah. Okay. Let's answer the first question first. You can see a difference in an animal right away.
Yeah.
And if you watch some of my videos, you'll see, especially when I adjust a horse. There's a response that horses do that's called lick and chew, right? And a lick and chew is a parasympathetic response. It means that they've shifted from the fight or flight side of their nervous system to the rest and digest side of their nervous system. Horses are flight animals, which means they would rather not fight. If they see a tiger, they would rather run away. And the way their brain is designed, because they are prey animals, if anything in the environment threatens them, they go from 0 to 60 immediately. They don't have varying degrees of stress. It's either stressed or not stressed. And so they see something move in the grass, they run away. They don't have time to figure out whether or not it's a lion. They just have to run away, and then if it turned out not to be a lion, well, that's fine. But if it really was one, well, then they save their lives. Right? And so they switch it on and off immediately. When they come back down from that flight response into a rest response, they create more saliva and they start to lick and chew. So you see nearly always after an adjustment, the horse will lower its head and it'll start to chew. And that's a really good indicator that the horse has moved from a more stressed state of its nervous system to a less stressed state of its nervous system. Dogs will often give a shake after the adjustment. Dogs are often visibly more energetic. So you'll see them running around the office afterwards, and their pain levels go down. An animal can't tell you when it's in pain, but sometimes you can see it. They'll limp or they'll be hesitant to do something or other, and then sometimes right after the adjustment, they'll say, "Oh, my dog couldn't jump up on the couch," but then it just jumps up on the table right after the adjustment, because it feels better. So you can see a difference right away. And what's interesting is that the animals tend to get better a lot faster than people. Yeah, and that's because, again, the prefrontal cortex. People have a lot of stories around their pain, around their illness, around what happened to them, whereas an animal doesn't. If an animal stepped in a hole and twisted itself out of whack, and we go and adjust it, it doesn't think about the story of, oh man, I'm so unlucky that I stepped in the hole. It just says, oh gosh, I wasn't feeling so good and now I'm feeling better. And then they go on and eat grass, right? And the story ends.
Right.
They don't run it anymore. And so it clears out of their nervous system really fast. So I have to see animals a lot less frequently than I have to see people. Yeah. And they get better a lot faster than people do in general.
Yeah.
Some people clear right out, but those are, as you know in practice, they're more rare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very rare nowadays.
Very rare.
Man.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because I'm sure other people are too. So I mean, especially this picture behind you here of you working with this horse.
Oh, look at that.
So how do you adjust a horse? The animal's so much bigger than you. How does that happen? Because I know there's criticism out there, people saying, dude, this is BS. There's no way that somebody
Impossible, right?
that the size of a human could adjust an animal the size of a horse.
Yeah. Well, it's not easy.
Sure.
It's possible, though. You know, if you look at the anatomy of a horse, like you said, the layperson might think, well, that animal is 1,200 pounds and this person is 150 pounds. It's a mismatch.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen.
Yep.
Because a 150-pound person might adjust a 150-pound person, right?
Maybe a 200-pound
200-pound person or even
Yeah.
larger, right? But if you take that person and increase their size by 6-fold, like that becomes a huge thing to try to adjust. So they project what it's like to be a person on the table, and they think, well, if I was a horse that was just 6 times that big, but that's not. That's a wrong comparison. You can't compare the adjustment of a person to adjustment in an animal in that way, because quadruped animals are inherently different from humans, which are biped animals. Bipeds, we stand on 2 feet, which is kind of impossible biomechanically, right?
Yep.
Our skeleton can't hold us up. We constantly have to adjust and change our musculature to hold our spine erect so that we're not constantly falling down. That means the muscles of the spine are much more active in a human than they are in a quadruped, and they're constantly active. Because of the vertical orientation of a human spine, compressive forces of gravity are constantly compressing the intervertebral discs. That means when a person gets on the table to get adjusted, it takes quite a bit of energy to change the state of their spine. A quadruped, however, standing on 4 feet, the spine is slung between the front and rear feet, right, between the shoulders and the pelvis, basically. And it functions more like a suspension bridge. It's not stacked and held up like guy lines like a human spine is.
Right.
Rather, it's suspended between front and rear. And that means the space between the intervertebral disc is never compressed by gravity. It also means that the passive subsystem, meaning the ligaments and the skeleton, holds up most of the weight of that animal, not the active subsystem, which would be the musculature, which is like ours. That's why a horse can sleep standing up, because the weight of their body is distributed through the limbs in such a way that they are biomechanically supported by their passive subsystem. That means it takes a lot less force comparative to size to adjust a horse than it would a human, right? And another thing is that when I get up above a horse, because of the horizontal axis of the spine, I have my body weight and I have the assistance of gravity to push through the animal, so that the bones move with relative ease. It still takes more force to adjust a horse than it does a person, but it doesn't take a proportional amount of force, which would be impossible to generate. And of course in the neck, you know, a horse has a neck that's 2 feet long. That's a lot of leverage. So even though they have big bones, you have a 2-foot lever to move them with. You know, so that's a lot easier also than you would think it is. The trick is getting the cooperation of the animal, because if I try to turn a horse's head and adjust its neck and it doesn't want me to, it can make it completely impossible. So the real trick in adjusting a horse is working with the horse. It's not a biomechanical problem or an anatomical.
Yeah. Cooperation is key.
Then, you know, I've seen other chiropractors where they've used instrumentation, right? In our office, we also use instrumentation as well too, like such as an integrator or an activator. You know, and obviously it's very light force.
Yes.
So how does that translate for an animal then in that manner?
Well, I don't use instruments in my practice. That's just
Mhm.
my preference.
Yeah.
However, I have a good friend, Dr. Scott Little, who uses
Mhm.
an integrator and a few other instruments, and he mostly does dogs.
Yeah.
And on a smaller animal, those things work just as well as they would on a small person, right?
Mhm,
Size
mhm.
proportionate.
Mhm.
However, it's my personal belief that something like that on an animal as large as a horse, you need more force than that to move a bone.
Mhm.
Your objective is not always to move a bone.
Right.
So it depends on your objective. You know, that can be used in certain ways that are really effective. But you know, it's the way that Jay taught me, and the way that he did it, and the way chiropractors done them in the past.
Mhm.
That I use my hands to adjust the horse,
Yeah.
and then people also.
Mhm.
But instrumentation, well, instrumentation as far as diagnostic is different. But
Mhm.
using an instrument to adjust a horse. I use an instrument sometimes
Mhm.
to get into some soft tissue stuff once in a while.
Mhm.
If there really is a soft tissue injury and it's bound up in such a way that makes it difficult to adjust, sometimes I'll address that first.
Mhm.
But almost always I use my hands.
Yeah. And so I think I had asked this question earlier because I got excited and I wanted to ask both questions,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I know that we got to answer. So
Mhm.
you know, I think for some people, it doesn't even, you don't have to be a practitioner. You can be a parent with your kid.
Mhm.
You can be a teacher, because right now we're getting ready to go into August and preparing that mindset of like we're going to send our kids to school and everything else. And I think, you know, sometimes you kind of have to hang up your baggage
Yeah.
and then go about your day and know that that burden or that baggage is still there, and then you're going to come back to it, but then to have the energy to be present, to do what matters to you in spite of those struggles, in spite of those stressors, is very important. I think it's not just true for chiropractors, for us, but it's also true, I see it in our own other facets of life as well too. So
Yeah.
what's your ritual? Like, do you have a ritual, or do you have a practice where you kind
Sure.
of, you know, navigate through that?
Yeah, that's a daily practice of mine, and it's kind of my constant practice.
Mhm.
I'll go through a couple different things. This question came up. I was doing a question and answer session with some chiropractic students a few weeks ago, and
Mhm.
right before the call, one of the ladies had gotten some bad news about a family member, and she was really weepy,
Mhm.
and she asked me, like, when I'm feeling what I feel right now, how can I go into the office and serve people? And
Mhm.
the first part is it's professional detachment.
Yeah.
You have to learn professional detachment, and that's not a popular idea nowadays, because everybody wants everything to be warm and fuzzy.
Mhm.
And you can still be warm and fuzzy, but be professionally detached. It means that you're not attached to whatever happens in your office,
Mhm.
and it also means that whatever's happening in your personal life, you don't attach to what's happening in your office.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? So while in a professionally detached state, you know, if somebody's going through a divorce, right?
Mhm.
You might be really attached to the idea of, oh, I love my spouse and I don't want to get a divorce and I wish this wasn't happening and stuff. But when you're in the office, you're not attached to it.
Yeah.
When you're in the office, you put that aside and you say, that's the other me.
Mhm.
And it's not disassociation, but
Mhm.
you're like, you know, it's my responsibility to show up with the best version of myself for these people. So how do I set that aside and show up in the office with no baggage?
Mhm.
Now, as far as rituals go, I always get to the office an hour early,
Mhm.
and I spend 20 minutes of just quiet time.
Mhm.
You can call it meditation if you want or whatever. But I think 20 minutes of quiet time every morning is a really good ritual that most people can fit in.
Mhm.
Just get up before everybody else does, sit in the window, look at nature for a while, drink your cup of coffee, and let whatever's bothering you slough off, because it's
Mhm.
going to come up into your mind, rather than force it out of your mind. Let it play its story for 20 minutes, you know, and then just let it run until you feel a little better, and then in the morning you'll be able to do your job.
Mhm.
As far as horses go, I have a travel schedule with horses. So I have about a 2-hour range within which I travel around my office, which is in Boulder. And that gives me a lot of time because I have drive time. You know, sometimes I drive an hour before I get to my first barn and start making my circuit. You know, so I have that time in my mornings. It's just kind of built in. So either I show up an hour early to the office, or I'm in the car on the way to the horses, and that gives me my quiet time. I have a lifestyle of contemplation. So we talked a little bit about meditation.
Mhm.
However, contemplation, if you imagine it, you're not thinking about stuff. It's like, what if you took what you're doing sitting down while you're meditating and you
Mhm.
did that while you were up walking around. And that's kind of what I endeavor to have as my constant state, rather than getting hung up in the stories and running the thoughts and so on and so forth. You become mindful of them, you pay attention to the world, and you're not attached to any particular thought as it comes up. And then throughout your day, that can be a little more practical for some people than setting aside a bunch of time.
Mhm.
A lot of times when people take up meditation, they do it for a while, but then they get busy and they stop.
Mhm.
You know, so trying to learn how to cultivate a contemplative lifestyle might be more appropriate for some people.
Yeah, something that I've been doing, and I don't know if it's helpful for listeners, that I find is, like, for instance, I don't know if this kind of falls into the realm of how you describe contemplative lifestyle, but there's that awareness of, I'm doing dishes and I'm grateful for the food that we were able to just eat, and then now I'm washing the dishes because it's there.
Yeah.
So is that kind of an example that you're talking about?
Yeah, so gratitude, that's one of the strategies that I use. I didn't mention it, but yeah, gratitude, there's a common saying, I think, when you're grateful, you get more to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And gratitude really helps you recontextualize stuff that you don't ordinarily want to do. You know, you can look at the pile of bills and say, my God, I don't want to pay these, or you can say, thank God that I have electricity. You know, and just recontextualizing something as gratitude really helps. And whether it's daily chores or whether it's big life events, you know, you can take something like a divorce or an illness and say, I don't know why, but for some reason this is for the highest good, so let me be thankful for that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my thinking about your practices and getting into, you know, the mindset of healing and the mindset of serving people. I think one of my favorites I learned back in school was, you know, prior to walking in the door to the office, you kind of imagine that there's a hook hanging outside the door, and like all that stuff, all your baggage, all your garbage and your crap, you have it in the bag and you just hang it on that hook and it stays there. Like I said, that professional detachment, it stays there. Whatever it is you're going through outside the office, it's there.
Right.
And you know, it's your choice when the end of the day comes to take it off the hook and take it back home with you, or as one of the doctors, you know, told me, he's like, oh, you just leave it there.
Right.
You just leave it there and move on. And that stuck with me a lot, because like, okay, because stuff does happen. We all have this thing called life, and it's really messy.
Yes.
And things come up, and you have to be able to deal with it, and in our profession and other healing professions, detach from it.
Right.
So moving from that, I'm really curious, because we got about 12 minutes left. One really popular video has come up recently of you adjusting a chicken. And that's been super fun.
Is it a chicken or a rooster? I think it's a rooster.
Well, no, it's a chicken.
Oh.
Boy chickens are roosters and girl chickens are hens.
Oh.
So there you go.
Yeah,
so it's a chicken. He was adjusting a chicken. If you haven't seen this video, it's worth looking at, because it was really interesting. Because one, for me, I've never seen.
And then where can we find it? Is it on Instagram too?
Yeah, it's on Instagram at Doc Marchman. Yeah, it's a rooster. It's a young rooster named Yardbird, and a young lady brought him into the office, and he hadn't been able to walk in several weeks. He's been lame on one leg, either not walking at all or hopping around on one foot. And she didn't know what to do, so she brought him in to see me, and I checked him out. There's a short video of it on the internet. I adjusted his leg and I adjusted his spine, and just that by the end of the video, he was already supporting weight on his foot. I told you how quickly animals tend to recover compared to how people do. Yeah, and they do, and that's a great example of it. There's another video I just posted yesterday of a horse who is one of my most difficult cases.
Is this Penny?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about this, because I remember the first post about it, and it's been such a fascinating story to watch.
Yeah. And so the horse who, you know, some animals clear right out, like Yardbird, the rooster did, and some animals take a lot longer. And this horse is one who I suspect has been subject to a great deal of trauma, and it's a really nice horse. However, working with her has been a really long and slow process.
Yeah.
And it's a great example, if you look at the video, of how I have to go real slow, I have to stay real quiet, and she's a somewhat dangerous horse. And
so to interrupt you real quick,
yeah.
can you, for our audience, can you give the background on Penny's story? Because most probably haven't seen it. So what's going on with Penny? What's the story behind it?
And she's a somewhat dangerous horse to work with because she kicks. And it's interesting when she kicks, because she'll let me adjust her neck. In the beginning, she wouldn't let me adjust her neck, but now she will. She'll let me adjust her legs. I can go behind her and pick up her rear feet. I can do anything I want to her in that way. But if I start to touch her back, from the upper back basically down to the pelvis, particularly around the pelvis, she gets really, really anxious. And the first time I adjusted her, she kicked me off my ladder, and she double barrel kicked the wall, and she bucked, and she got herself all tangled up in the cross ties, and it was a real dangerous situation. So I had to change my approach with her, because I realized, like, she's not the same horse up front as she is in the back. Something happened to her, and I suspect that somebody hurt her. I don't know doing what, but the reason I suspect that is because if I run my hand down her back, she tries to kick me. But if I run a tool, like an instrument, down her back, she doesn't. So it's not the pain of the pressure, it's the sensation of the human hand that causes her to get upset, and she kicks and bucks, and she's getting a lot better. It's taken a long time, and that's an example of, I told you that animals don't carry the story. However, the deepest part of the brain, the limbic system, will hold on to experiences of trauma. So she's not running a story around it, but the body, when you touch her rear end, the body feels like it's in grave danger.
That's crazy when you think about just that, and then how that ties into our human experience, that we still run the story, and how deeply entrenched, and there is this huge body-mind connection from that perspective.
Right.
Sorry to interject, but that was like
mind-blowing. Exactly.
Wow.
So it works that way with people.
Yeah.
There can be a disconnect between what they're feeling in their prefrontal cortex and what they're feeling in the limbic brain, because they might think, "Oh, doc, I'm fine," and then you check their spine and they're all sorts of twisted out of whack because of the distortions in their nervous system are so protective that they're not even allowing themselves to become aware of it. And that's something like that's happening in this horse. And I've been adjusting her for about 6 months now, and she's gotten a lot of improvement. However, so you go on my Instagram, you'll see the video of Penny, but you also see the rooster, yardbird, and you'll see the range that it can go in. It can go from an immediate miracle cure like the chicken, or to something that takes us a long time to unwind. And my process with Penny is not to try to fix anything. I don't know what happened to her. We don't know her history. My process is to try to help her unwind that protective pattern that is causing her to be a danger to herself and others. She's dumped a couple of riders. A little girl got dumped off of her. So she's Penny. I know her owners, and she's, they're really committed to her healing. But a horse like that is often in danger of being shipped off to the slaughterhouse because nobody knows how to handle it.
That kind of leads into, what is the story behind the owners that suddenly they, this, obviously they're not the same owners that Penny was raised with to hold this trauma, but what's their mindset? What are some mindset of owners when they introduce you to their animals?
So Penny's an interesting case. Penny we don't know what happened to Penny. She was rescued at auction, I believe. And then her previous owner hired Jay, my predecessor, to adjust Penny. And then when Jay retired, I took over adjusting Penny. And then that woman, who is a good friend of mine, sold Penny to a new person. And as part of the transaction, we had this conversation. Penny is a great horse. She's got a lot going for her. She knows what to do. However, she's got this problem that makes her kind of dangerous. So are you committed to going through this healing process with her? You're not going to sell her and dump her off, and she'll get killed or something like that. So the owner is completely on board, but I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the owner right at the beginning. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we only get one chance, and then the horse gets put down or something.
So I would imagine that horse owners, just like many people, don't really necessarily have this chiropractic philosophy understood, the body heals from the inside out, or innate expression of innate. So what are they coming to you with initially that suddenly, are they starting to see something different for them? It shifts their perspective perhaps in this experience of watching their animals heal?
That's a good question. And it's just like we talked about in the beginning about how people come into the office usually because they've hurt themselves. Well, people often call me about their animals because they see that the animal has hurt themselves. They got hung up in a fence, or they stepped in a hole, or who knows what happened. Often what I'll see is that an experienced rider will get on the horse and they'll say it doesn't feel right under saddle. They'll say something feels off. Or sometimes they'll say, well, my horse is real heavy on the left rein, it doesn't want to turn left. And they think the horse is being obstinate. When really the horse may be subluxated, it may have difficulty turning its neck to the left, and so it doesn't want to. You know, so it could be something like that. Often what I see what people see as behavioral problems are actually they clear right up once the system gets back in balance. Because you know, a dog, for example, I've had some dogs who were dog aggressive. You know, they go to the dog park and a dog gets near them and they bark and bite. However, after they started getting adjusted, they stopped that behavior. Well, it wasn't because they were behaving badly. It's because they were in pain and they were afraid that if another dog approached them, they were going to get hurt. So they defended themselves preemptively. And that's a lot of times that's the case with horses too. You know, they'll dump a rider. Well, if your back is twisted out of whack and we put a saddle on it and a 150-pound person on it, you'd probably dump them too. You know, they think the horse is being bad. I think the horse is being smart. So a lot of times I get called out for behavioral issues. Sometimes there's obvious pain or lameness, some, you know, an animal's limping or something like that. And then, you know, they call me out for the same reason that people first come in the office, to address the symptom. And then through the process of the adjustment, we get to then relay the message of chiropractic, and that I'm not really trying to cure the symptom, I'm trying to create maximum efficiency for the expression of life. And when people see their animals change so dramatically, oftentimes they want that too.
That's cool. And that makes me think of the behavioral piece, makes me think of our dog. We've got a cute little black pup named Olive who recently she took a tumble off the couch or something. Lynn's not quite sure what happened because she was in another room, but she heard the dog fall, she yelped, and then it was really wild because the next several days she wasn't her typical puppy self, which was like she's just this little black ball of energy that's jumping on everybody and greeting them at the door and everything. She was very skittish, she was hiding in her crate, and she didn't want anything to do with anybody. And we took her to Ryan and checked her and said, hey, you know, there's something going on with the knee and you know, something here in the pelvis, and adjusted her and you know, said, oh, she should be back to normal within a couple days. If she's not, let me know. And you know, like we've talked about this entire show, how animals heal so much faster than humans. And sure enough, within a couple of days, I mean, she was back to her normal puppy self. We walked into the room, we walked in our place, and she's jumping at the door, and she's excited to see us again. It was just like, it kind of just gives you that wow moment every single time. Like, oh, this is the coolest thing. So my final question for you in the last couple minutes.
Yeah.
Do you have a bucket list of animals that you want to adjust that you haven't been able to yet?
Yeah. I really want to adjust an elephant.
Yeah?
Yeah. I really would like to adjust. I've seen pictures of a guy adjusting an elephant. I thought, man, I got to do that. I got to try that before I die. If Denver Zoo, if you're listening.
There we go. Denver Zoo. Let's get these elephants checked.
Maybe all the other animals too.
Yeah.
Right. What else? Anything else besides an elephant? What about can animals of the ocean be adjusted? Have
You know,
thought about that?
I heard of somebody adjusting a dolphin with an activator, but I'm kind of dubious. I want to see it before I believe it. You know, I don't know how you hold on to a dolphin underwater.
I have no idea.
You'd just be swimming along and use your arms.
I've swam with a dolphin. I mean, I can imagine hanging on to it would be nearly impossible because they're just like they're like the finest rubber.
And they're rubber, and the fat on them is really thick. And, you know, I've adjusted pigs before, and pigs have this big, thick fat on the back that's really hard to get through. So you imagine that on something slippery underwater.
Yeah. Good luck.
but I'm willing to try it.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
right on. All right, so for those that are listening, Ryan, where can people get a hold of you? How can they find out about you?
So it's at Doc Marchman on Instagram, or theadjustatorium.com. My practice's name is The Adjustatorium. You can look me up there. You can see my videos, my posts on Instagram. I write informational posts fairly often, and I post some fun videos of me adjusting animals and things like that. So if you're interested, look me up.
What city are you in?
I'm in Boulder. My office is in Niwot, which is about 10 minutes outside of Boulder.
Yeah, his new office is beautiful, by the way, over in Niwot. It's a gorgeous office. I love that space. I love what you've cultivated.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you found this informative. We hope you found it interesting, and certainly opened up a new world of that animals need care too, not just from the vets, but also from the chiropractor. So Dr. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes.
And for everybody out there, this has been the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show. And Dr. Lynn, what's our question that we always end with?
Oh, yes. This comes from Mary Oliver's poem, Summer Days. And the last question she asks in that poem is, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So something to be able to ponder about for the rest of your weekend here as you enjoy yourself and your time with yourself, with your family. And thank you so much for joining us here, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.